Hi, everyone. This is Robert Albanese from the Vancouver Jewish Film Festival with Michael Potter, the executive producer of Tracks, also known as Stumbling Stones Amsterdam. Michael, great to have you here today.
Thank you. What an honor to be on the podcast.
Well, I have to say that when I saw the film, obviously it reminded me of my own journey through the streets of Amsterdam and in Rome, and it got me thinking. Is there a connection? I mean, obviously, this particular, piece of work goes into the actual craft of making them. Is it the same in all the other cities?
Yes, and and there's kind of a lengthy, like many films, a lengthy backstory behind the film and why we chose various characters and how we approached it. But originally, so I lived on the canal that we focus on, the Herengracht, the Gentleman's Canal in Amsterdam. I lived on that canal for 2 years, and at one point I had this epiphany, which was, and every 15 minutes I hear the same bells that Anne Frank heard when she was in hiding from the same church. Every 15 minutes I hear that every day when living in the flat. And and at one point I had this epiphany about, hey, what happened to my Jewish neighbors on this canal? And so I found a database, and I don't, even though I lived in the Netherlands, I don't speak Dutch, but I found a database that could answer the mysteries. And so even though it's Dutch, because it's a database, you can kind of figure out how to navigate it. And so I found that there were a number of people that were affected, and it was kind of interesting because this particular canal, it was kind of higher socioeconomic part of Amsterdam, and many of the Jews, including Anne Frank, they were refugees. So they were not higher socioeconomic status. They were back in Germany or back in their home countries in many instances, but by then they were refugees. And I was surprised that there were as many Jewish people in that part of the canal. On the other parts of Amsterdam, there was a Jewish quarter, which was more, it wasn't really a ghetto, but it was a lower socioeconomic area. And so the question was, could we organize the stones to memorialize these people? And so we reached out so Gunther Deming is the original artist, the sculptor who came up with this concept, and he's in Berlin. And for him, it was really important that every one of these stones be made by hand. So every letter, they take a die and they hit it. And this, again, was kind of, as we talk about in the film, it's almost the counterbalance to the mechanization of the Holocaust itself.
Right.
But I think the other part of it was that when I first put in the request and said, look, we'd like to do these stones for these 70 individuals on the Herengracht, and I said, how long will it take? And they said 7 years. And I said, 7 years is unacceptable, because every day we lose these survivors, and even the family members and we're starting to lose the descendants of the survivors. So it's like 7 years seem like unacceptable. So we asked the representative in Amsterdam who represents the Stone Project. We said, is it possible that we could have an apprentice who could study under Gunther Deming in Berlin, who could learn how to do these stones? And they said, look, like most other artists, Gunther is very possessive of his artwork. He's a perfectionist, and he doesn't want to let it go. But and this was during pandemic, so there were some discussions and some negotiations, and eventually Gunther said yes, he was willing to have a apprentice to do this, and that was really Alexander, the person who's profiled in the film. And Alexander is he's German, but he lives in Amsterdam. So during pandemic, he drove up to Berlin, and he studied to become that apprentice and to learn the craftsmanship. And really it's almost it's almost a religious meditative devotion to like, how do you do these stones? Because it's because every letter is separate and you have to do it backwards. It's almost deliberately slow. It's almost like a typewriter and deliberately just choosing to do one finger at a time. And so those are how those stones are created. And I guess that's up for debate, right? Because if you and in the film we said, hey, it's going to take, just for the 104,000 Jews that were murdered in the Netherlands, it would take 80 years to do that. But so you could say, hey, well, why don't we 3D print these things? Why don't we mechanize and do this? And yes, it could be more efficient, but you would certainly lose the beauty and the seriousness of the process of remembering. I think that's my take on it.
Wow, that's not surprising, but it just makes you wonder, right? So if that's the case in just Amsterdam, so is it also the same original artist who those stones that I saw in Rome that came from him, or was that also a situation where it was an apprentice or some such thing?
I think that that's generally done by Gunter, and then he comes out and he oftentimes lays these stones, and that becomes part of the process. That's like, they say, okay, well, it will take this amount of time, and right now we're trying to do on Thursday. One of my dear friends, who's a survivor, not only a survivor, she was a spy behind Nazi lines. And not only was she a spy behind Nazi lines, she was a Jewish spy behind Nazi lines. She turns 103 on Thursday. And so we're trying to get stones organized for her. And unfortunately, she lost one of her sisters to the Nazis. We're trying to get a stone for her. And and in every country, it has different levels of difficulty. But in the case of France, it has to be authorized by a local government. And we keep on saying, look, we don't want to lose this person before they've been honored and before the stone has been remembered. But in that case, in the case of France, since there's so few stones, Gunter would probably be the person who normally would go to do that, unless it gets on an expedited process where we're trying to do it before someone's life is gone.
And as far as Maclovia, your director, so you folks have worked together before.
That's right. So we've been fortunate enough to work on a number of films together. She's done long film format documentary. I've done long documentary, full length feature documentary. But we spent a lot of time in the last few years just really focusing on the short form documentary. And of course, it's sometimes frustrating because there's so many things that can go into these films, and you always get frustrated at what you're forced to leave out of it, including with this one. But that also leaves the very rich backstory because so much is left out of the main feature.
Yeah, that's very true. I've often seen documentaries go from 10 minutes to 14 minutes, or some 30 to 40 to 50, because just like you say, there's so much to tell in the story. It's like knowing when to stop is sometimes very difficult. Yeah. Kudos for putting this together so concisely that it can have provide an accompanying piece to features, or to be part of a series of short films. And I must say that I found it was nice to see the actual artistry that goes into, having seen the stones in the ground, to then see what goes in behind it. I never imagined that it was such a work of art, and like you're saying, the die by hand, and you're working the letters backwards. If you make a spelling mistake, there's no autocorrect.
Yes, and occasionally, from time to time, and oftentimes in the German language or the Dutch language, these words can be very, very long, and so it's possible that you get a small, kind of typo, as it were. And and occasionally the stones have to be removed and a new one has to be inserted if there's a small error. But one of the things that was very important about this film, I mean, all the film itself and all the footage, there was about 8 hours of footage, all of it will be donated to the nonprofit in the Netherlands that focuses on the stones. And then the other thing that we felt was important also in terms of trying to amplify the impact and the urgency of this project. I mean, one of the motivations was with this short film, is to inspire people, to give them the confidence that they too could sponsor a street or canal anywhere in the world. And that's really part of the message that we're trying to get out. And then the final message, again, to amplify the impact, is that we're creating a YouTube channel where user-generated content about stories related to the Stones could all be part of one single channel.
Wow.
And we're actually in the process. There's a beautiful short documentary about a soccer player who was in the 30s, who was recruited out of New York, who moved to Amsterdam, who played for the Ajax, the famous Ajax soccer team in Amsterdam, which, by the way, is called the Jewish soccer team. And there's a whole side story, a backstory about sometimes controversial, because a lot of the fans refer to it generally fondly as they call the team the Super Jews, and it's awkward because there's really not that many Jews associated with it. But the player, Eddie, was, when the Nazis moved into Amsterdam, he was unable to prove that he was American, and he was killed in the Holocaust, and he was killed at Auschwitz. And that's a short film, and we want that to be one of the first films that gets added to the channel that Tracks will be running on. And eventually, if we do our job well, there could be hundreds of short stories that really keep the memory alive. And as we argue in the film, and as the main subjects argue, that under the Jewish tradition, as long as the memory stays alive, in a sense, the life stays alive. And that's I think one of the goals of the channel.
Mm-hmm. And the channel itself will focus on Stones history, or just history in general?
It'll be histories of the Stones, so it'll be behind each of the Stones. So and it'll be generally like sort of user generated, and it'll be hosted by the Stichting, which is the association that deals with the Stones in Amsterdam. So they have an existing website, and they'll run that channel.
Wow, that's very cool. Please keep us posted about that. Be very interested.
Oh, absolutely, because eventually there'll be stories, there'll be stories that come out of that, and maybe even cross stories as they kind of cross-pollinate each other. So it's almost like its own ecosystem of stories, which again just keeps the tradition and keeps the lives of so many people alive who we don't want to forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you so much, Michael. This has been very illuminating and educational. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Well, thank you. We're grateful for the invitation, and super excited that the film is showing up in Vancouver. And if people want to know more about it, if they're intrigued about the backstory or how they can do this themselves, always available to pass that story on, because obviously it's something I feel very, very passionate about. It's interesting, and the other part of the backstory is that, I mean, I did live in the Netherlands, but I have no known family members that were Dutch Jews. But of course, we lost family members in Hungary. We lost family members in the Ukraine. But there's a kind of a larger calling for me, anyways, which was like, let's just keep the memory alive, and also to empower people that they can create these monuments for their family members, or maybe for neighbors. And I think it's worthy. I think it's important, and I obviously feel very, very strongly about it. But and so pleased that we were able to do this film. And just a final note, which was something that you brought up, which was we talk about the artistry of it. On a project like this, you think you know what the film's going to be about, and as you're filming it and as you interview, you think you're coaching people to get to a certain end, and to a certain extent, that all worked out. But when we were done filming this, we really had a little bit of an existential crisis about, okay, what is that story going to be? And we did, we had a number of family members that were generous enough to come along with us on this journey, and they were there in the canals, and so many of them were just touched and captivated by the craftsmanship, just the tactile part of it, the importance of the stone, and just how that anchors our thinking about, just kind of the gravity of everything. And all of them, as we kind of, it wasn't quite really a focus group, but as we asked them, we said, like, what was meaningful for you? What resonated with you? And that just, and that really captured, and of course it captivated us, but it wasn't until we really had that, the kind of the brainstorming, and we really realized there was something therapeutic. And we said, okay, that is important. That just understanding, like, how the stones are made, and just and I think that kind of solved the question that we were asking ourselves, which is, like, what direction does this go? What do we have to capture? And hopefully those audiences will, like you said, like, we'll say, hey, we had no idea. We never really thought about it. We saw it, but we did. And I think that we were super satisfied with the way it all turned out. So
Totally. That's exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's how I felt for sure. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks again, Michael.
All right. Grateful. Thank you so much. And good luck with the next set of screenings that you have coming.
Thank you very much. All right. Take care. Okay.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.